Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jan Leary, and we want to welcome you to the Truth Zone. We have two special guests here today. Pastor Keith Sullivan, who presently is preaching in Cork, Ireland, and Pastor Jeff Beswick, who is now preaching in Chicopee, Massachusetts. And we're going to start off with Pastor Keith Sullivan. I remember the early days of Pastor Keith coming into the church when he was very, very young. So, Pastor Keith, tell us what it was all about, like when you came into the church, and what actually drew you into the church. Were you just curious, or just tell us the whole story about what it was like?
Hi, Jen. Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. We're going back to 1984, so a little while ago. But I was playing in a rock and roll band. I was playing with Mark Bartley, a good friend of mine, and a couple of other guys. And the name of the band was Keith Clutch and the Camaros. I was Clutch. And so I was associated with all kinds of the paraphernalia that goes with rock and roll, girlfriends and drugs and parties and this kind of thing. And Mark Bartley, the guitarist, he gave his life to Jesus Christ. And his girlfriend gave her life to Jesus, and I saw some change in them. It was pretty remarkable, and I won't go through all the details, but through that, my girlfriend at the time gave her life to Jesus Christ and began to see God do some things in her. And so eventually, it was a couple of weeks process, but God began to get a hold of me, and on July 22nd, 1984, I received Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior.
That's remarkable. I actually didn't know how you came into the church. I remembered seeing you, just like I had remembered seeing Mark and stuff, but I did not know the story. That's phenomenal. Okay, so then you made it into the church, and tell us, what were some of the things that God was drawing you into? What were some of the ministries? What did you find yourself doing?
Well, I remember very specifically there was a band called Harvest, and it consisted of one young girl and a married woman who were lead singers, an older Scott Joplin-type piano player, a guitarist who did nothing but solo, kind of Jimi Hendrix-style solos, Woodstock kind of things, a trumpet player, a drummer, and that was it. And I was a bass player. And so that was disappointing to me that there was no bass player. But I remember the music wasn't all that great, but the message was. And so as I became a Christian, and I think I was a Christian a couple of 3 weeks maybe, and there was an outdoor concert. And Pastor Stevens at the time knew I had a bass and an amp, which was unique. And we were going to have a revival with Pastor Paul Campo, and there was a drummer who had come into the church, semi-professional. He had played with some bigger names, and so he asked the drummer and myself if we would do an outdoor concert with Pastor Campo as he came. So right from the very beginning, music was a major part. I played in lots of music groups. At one time, I think I was playing bass in 3 groups. I eventually switched over to guitar, a little keyboard, even played drums at one point. And so music was a great expression. I also loved children. I had worked for many years out at Camp Linden out in Sandwich before I was a Christian, teaching sailing and different things. So I got involved in children's ministry, became one of the first children's church leaders and preachers, if you will, And so kind of started that ministry. I also did the sound. I also cleaned the church for a while, ran a Bible study, a men's house, and that's probably all that I can remember at the moment.
Well, you were definitely busy doing God's work, and that's amazing how much work you were doing. And so, Keith, then you just sort of moved along in your Christianity, and tell us about you met your wife, how many children you have, and where you started pastoring. Where did and when did God actually send you out? How old were you? That was amazing. I remember people were saying, how can it ever be that this church will make it? He's so young. But that's the miracle power of Jesus Christ.
I met my wife. We both graduated from high school. She graduated from Nauset, and I graduated from Cape Cod Tech in 1984. We met in the church. She gave her life to Jesus Christ on Easter of 1985. And by the end of 1985, December, we began to date. And we talked about what we wanted to do and how I wanted to be a preacher, and she wanted to support a man in the ministry. And so we married in 1987, March of 1987, at 20 years old. And we went on staff about 6 weeks later. And at that time, the assistant pastor did everything but preach. I was doing lots of behind-the-scenes work and lots of business issues. I do remember a very funny story. We had a woman in the church, and her brother had escaped from a mental institution and had been threatening her life, and she had been put under a 24-hour police security guard, and the policeman walked in, and he looked at the church, and he turned to the head usher, and he said, "You must be Keith Sullivan." And he pointed at me, and he said, No, he's Keith Sullivan. He looked at me, he goes, "You are in charge of this?" Because I probably looked about 14. And so we were on staff for 1 year, and then we went out to Falmouth, Massachusetts to pioneer a church. And we started a church there. And then the emergency rose up about a year later, and I took over a church in East Hampton, Massachusetts, which we later moved to Chicopee. I was there for 10 years. We came back to Cape Cod for 2 years as the associate pastor. Then I went to Lithuania and spent 11 years in Vilnius, and now we've been just about 2 years in Cork, Ireland.
I'm not kidding. That is quite a road. I mean, that's the amazing thing about pastors that we get to see. This is phenomenal, the road that actually God takes you on. So Keith, tell us, basically Cork is a new work for you now. And you said last night, I think it was last night, that you have always had it in your heart that you wanted to go to Cork. And you waited actually quite some time about going there. Tell us about what the difference is between say Lithuania, Cork, and the United States. I know there has to be different issues that you were dealing with, and really how God helped you with all of these.
Okay, they're different places, so you're dealing with different issues. It's and I haven't been in the United States as a pastor for 14 years, so we're going back to pre-9/11 before I left, and so quite a different time, I'm sure, in the United States. So I wouldn't be one to tell you all of that. Plus, I pastored in the United States in my 20s. I pastored in Lithuania in my 30s, and up to about 45, and now I'm in Cork, and so I've changed as well. And so, but Lithuania's challenges probably were its winters. I know you had a tough winter this year. That would be just the norm. And so that was challenging in the language and the culture, different culture. Ireland is much easier in the sense that I grew up in an Irish family, my last name being Sullivan, and my great-grandfather coming from County Kerry and all this kind of thing. The Irish culture was my family, and ironically enough, I see lots of doubles of people who I know here in Cape Cod over in Ireland. They have their twin over there, if you will. And so The culture there is, of course, different. It's older in the sense that, the old sod and those kinds of challenges. But people are people everywhere. You deal with the same heart issues. You deal with the same fronts. People, you talk to them you witness to them about Jesus. Instantly, they go back to their old religion. Well, I'm this, or I'm that, I'm Catholic, I'm Protestant, I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. Well, you're a drunken, lying, cheating, thieving person, but you're hiding behind your religion. And so the issue of Christianity is always the heart, not the head. It's always an experience. It's not something you're born into. And so you just have to concentrate on aiming for the heart of people. That's how the gospel reached me, and that's the effect of the gospel. If you go on an intellectual level, it's just this. That's what other religions do. Is they appeal towards intellect. They appeal towards our nature, and that goes right back to the Garden of Eden, where the snake said to Eve, "Your eyes will be open. You'll become, wise in your mind." And so, God's aim has always been the heart. Jesus said, "I've come to heal the brokenhearted." And so, if you aim towards the heart with people, that's where you're effective.
So, Keith, wow, that was extremely well said. Just one other question I have for you, Keith. You have an awesome family. God's blessed you so much. Tell us about your children, what they're doing now. It's just amazing to me to see God raise up children and they emulate their parents.
We had two children. Our daughter, who is in her 20s now, oh gosh, my wife's not here. But anyway, I think she's 24. She's a mother. She had my grandson turns 1 May 3rd, and so we're thrilled about that. He's precious. They live in Holland. She married a Dutchman, and they live in Holland. They're actually starting a church in a city called Rijswijk, which has to do with some hill or something. But anyway, it's next to The Hague or Den Haag, and I have to learn Dutch. My grandson will speak Dutch. And so they're pastoring there. My son-in-law, he's a great guy, great man, wants to be a man of God and is a man of God, treats my daughter the way I want my daughter to be treated. And so they're fantastic. They've been starting a church there, and they've been there a couple of 3 years, maybe 4 years. 3 years, I think they've been there, and they are just seeing some very good things. They recently saw a couple come into their church, living together, who are going to be married very soon and just want to do it right, live for God. My son, he's out in Prescott, Arizona. He's actually going to be joining the Marine Corps in the next few months. And he's doing well, and after the conference here that we're attending, we're going to be going out to see him, and I spoke with his pastor recently, and he seems to be doing well, and so we're blessed, and God seems to be helping our family, and it's a great comfort. Even though there's time zones, we have to figure this out, how to coordinate when we talk to whom and when and what time zone they're in. Even though we're that far apart, we're still very close. We talk a lot. I have the phone bills to prove it, but God really helps us, and it's great to have children that listen to you and respect you, and that you can love, and it's just a great blessing.
Wow. Thanks a lot, Pastor Keith. That is amazing. Your whole testimony is just incredible, and we're going to keep praying for you because God's doing great things in your lives. Thanks a lot. For our next guest, we have Pastor Jeff Beswick. And Pastor Jeff, tell us now, what was it like when you first came into the church, and just actually what God did in your life?
Well, there's a lot of story to that, but Originally, as far as becoming a part of our church, a number of guys were on the streets outreaching, and they thought I was a college kid, had the outward appearance together. And it's kind of funny, the guy who talked to me, hundreds of people going by, it was a bus stop, and he just asked me about Jesus. I told the guy I was born again. I literally I never spoke those words, really didn't even know what they meant. But I told him I was born again. He was excited. Wow, where do you go to church? Do you know Jesus? And it was interesting. He was talking like he knew Jesus, and I just knew there was a God. I believed in God all my life. Wasn't raised with church or religion, but he invited me out to church. I came out, and it's kind of funny. He showed up at the place where I was living, told me he'd pick me up, and I thought maybe he was trying to hit on me, and so I was watching myself. But he brought me out to church, and I didn't like the pastor. I didn't like the people. But undeniable was the fact that two things. One was the love that they had for one another, and the love that they had for me, which I was beyond being lovable at that point. And then also when the pastor preached, God just dealt with my heart, and I just felt the impression of God trying to draw me, and the seriousness of it. I knew my life was in trouble. I got a lot of background to it, but my family actually had my funeral planned at that point because of how far I had really messed my life up. And at an altar call, gave my heart to Jesus Christ, and quite a beginning of a change, and quite a wonderful beginning at that point.
Now, I know there's a lot of people out there, Pastor Jeff, that could actually relate to your testimony, like where you came from before you got saved. I mean, there's a lot of people that go through a lot of trials, especially today. Today, it's like the youth is almost, to me, in some way in peril because of what's happening, and, just a lot of things. Why don't we just back it up and you tell us, like, what were your struggles before you came to know Jesus?
Well, I can say that a lot of my background started like most families today. At the time, it was very rare to have a divorce that was taking place. This was back before it was prominent, and so came from a broken home. Knew what poverty was, knew what it was to open up a refrigerator with no food, but still had a loving mother. She married a wonderful guy, great guy, but my dad, my biological father, was president of a motorcycle club. And so from early years, I idolized who he was, and didn't care anything for really being good, just wanted to be like my dad. And I think it was a seedbed for a lot of my initial problems. I was very drawn to alcohol. I was drawn to drugs at an early age at the time, 12, 13. I know kids are getting involved earlier, but to condense it down, it made my family's life a living hell, and began to make mine that. I was given an ultimatum within my junior year at high school, pulled aside because of drugs and drinking, said, you are no way going to finish in 4 years. We're giving you an option. Drop out, we kick you out, or you can go in the military. And I chose the military, and the drugs and the drinking just escalated. Here's freedom. Here's an opportunity. You still have hopes and dreams for something to really work well. You want a girl in your life. You want life to go well. Ended up being kicked out of the military, Article 15, letters of reprimand, letters of counseling. Came home, and drug addiction was, it had run in my family, ran in my grandfather's life, my father's life, my own life, and began to really hit bottom. I've been through 5 drug rehabs. I've been in jails. I've been in lockups, institutions, nothing working. I had seen counselors through all of this. and began to get to a place where, I was losing sanity as well. I got thrown in psych centers because of they call it mental hygiene laws. The police would pick me up and take me to the hospital. I would sometimes be taken to psych centers and locked up for months at a time. And during that time, my uncle was a Christian, and it was a horrible time. I had been dragged in. Don't remember about a week's worth of time prior to that and going into that. I was dragged into a psych center, and I remember just looking down, seeing two guys in white jackets on both sides of me, all just out of my mind, and the doctors had written me off at that point. Said, told my family, we've never seen somebody getting where your son's at, doing the drugs he's doing, ever recovering. And my uncle prayed a prayer with me, and at the time, all I could do was repeat what he was saying. I didn't have the ability to think. I couldn't tell the difference between hallucination and reality. I'd done a lot of damage, but within 3 weeks of praying a prayer with him, and I had been locked up for some time, God began to do a restoration, and I was released shortly thereafter. I've lived in the woods, I've lived in graveyards, been homeless, I've had bum missions kick me out, and it was the gospel of Jesus Christ. I could go on and on with the stories of what had happened. It was the gospel of Jesus Christ that cut through all of that, gave hope to a man that had no hope. And the people in church just began to speak of what God could do, which I'd never heard anybody talk about. I'd never heard anybody talk about Jesus as a person you could know. I never heard that Jesus could heal the brokenness. I never knew that God could change a life. And so all of this culminating and coming together, miracle deliverances, set free from drugs, a powerful thing. I remember being in a psych center, and literally the people had told me for weeks and months, it was about a month and a half, and they said, Jeff, ask God to set you free. Ask Jesus to set you free. And so I didn't know any better. I just said, you know what, I'm going to ask God to do what my pastor's preaching, what these people are doing and telling me to do. And I remember the day before I could open my eyes, a morning laying in a bed, and before I could open my eyes, the addiction was gone. What had driven my life for years was absolutely gone. And I remember thinking, Jen, I go, okay, now what the heck do you Christians do? I don't know how to live without this thing driving my life. And it was a powerful beginning. My pastor told me, he said, Jeff, you're going to look at your life in 6 months and not believe what you came from, not believe what Jesus has done. And it was only the start. He's done so much in, so many years. It was 1987, August 7th, 87 when I gave my heart to Christ and really locked in at that point.
Whoa, that is absolutely phenomenal. Honestly, when I hear your testimony, that gives hope to so many people. I mean, it just wasn't too long ago that we were reading in the Cape Cod Times. It was really sad about all the teenagers that are involved in these drugs that are being laced with some pretty scary things. But they can turn to Christ, and Christ can deliver them like he delivered you.
Yes.
That is so amazing. Well, tell us now, your beautiful wife that I love so dearly worked with me for a while, and I totally love that girl. She has been such a blessing to our lives. Tell us about, you met Nancy, and then how God started to move and get you involved in ministry.
I met my wonderful wife, Nancy. She, at the time when I first met her, we were working at a youth camp, and she's beautiful. I was a single guy. I just remember walking around, but I also had learned some disciplines in my life, being saved and being a Christian. And she caught my attention, but I said, you know what, that's not what I'm here for. And so I didn't really talk to her, focused on the camp. But a number of people encouraged me just that, she's a wonderful girl. You might just want to talk to her. And so I remember at the end of the camp asking Pastor Campo, said, hey, do you mind if I talk to that girl, if I go out to eat with her? And just out of respect, she had recently, a few months back, she had lost a husband. He was a Christian, a great guy, died of cancer. She had 2 children, and her pastor was really a blessing to her, and so kind of out of respect, I talked to him and just asked what he thought. Didn't get a no, and so we began communicating, began writing letters back and forth. And I was living at the time Rochester, New York. She's in Cape Cod, and a wonderful relationship started. The thing I can say that's kind of amazing, I had heard a testimony when I was a single guy. All those years I took in sermons on how to be married, how to live right, and what God could do. And I heard about a couple, and actually from the Cape Cod church, that got married, and the first time the guy had ever kissed his wife was at the altar, and it was after the pastor said, "You can now kiss the bride." And I just set that as a goal in my life. That was not my past. It was not my wife's past before she became a Christian, but that is our testimony that when Pastor Campo married us, that the first time I kissed her in front of all those hundreds of people was after we both said, "I do," and God really has blessed it. We have a wonderful marriage. We have, I adopted the two children. They carry my name, Kayla and Shane. I love them. We had a child together.
So, Pastor Jeff, tell us now, how did Jesus begin to use you as a couple?
I would have to say one of the things in our churches, there's in the investing in lives, and my pastor and a number of other guys, they had invested. We call it discipleship, but it's really just helping people to take their life, turn it around, learn how to live for God, and follow what God says in His Word, which works. And began to get involved. They would go out into the city. They'd talk to the church. Would be talking to people about Jesus. And what I'm finding is my life and what I had to say was impacting people. And I was seeing that it wasn't just the words, but it was something that was touching people's heart. It wasn't an intellectual thing, but people that religion didn't help them, their drugs weren't helping them, relationships weren't filling the gap, and yet I'm just speaking the basics of what God can do. And many times we would go out, my wife and I, we'd have our kids with us, and we just talked to people, and there was an openness, and we saw, and still continue to see, so many lives touched, people that would pray, saying, just asking Jesus is like, "Lord, whatever you did in this guy's life, I want in my life." I've prayed with people doing far better than I ever was. I've prayed with people that have been down and out on the street, and I have seen many, many lives changed by the power of God, and it's a privilege to be used by Him in that venue.
So actually you did 2 pastoral works for Christ. So tell us, where was the first one and what are you doing now?
In 2003, my wife and I were asked to take over a church. Cape Cod congregation had invested and labored for a city in Florida called St. Augustine. And my wife and I were asked if we would be interested in going down there and seeing if our lives could make impact. We do what's called pioneer works. You go into a family goes into a city, husband and a wife, and you basically are seeing if God is able to raise up a work. If your investment in that city, your labors in that city will accomplish anything. And what we saw was God began to build a church. People responding to just a one-on-one, people that really wanted to be helped. And we started with Bible study. We ended up getting a building fairly quickly. We rented a building and watched God begin to bring in young people, some older people, some families, and little by little, a church grew. And I grew as a man of God. God helped me as a pastor to be able to take life lessons and the Word of God and just communicate that through the preaching of His Word. And today there's a church that's well established, St. Augustine. And from that point, right now we are in Chicopee, Massachusetts. My wife and I have been there for 4 years. We took a work over from several couples that had labored within that city, and we're seeing God do the same thing, use our lives, helping people, marriages, young children. One of the fascinating things is that we're seeing kids right now that we're able to bring the gospel to in the hope of Jesus and the hope of salvation that literally don't even know Christmas songs. They don't know songs about Jesus. They don't know songs about God. And to be able to give them the gospel message and the hope that Jesus gave me as a really messed up young man, and seeing that to kids that haven't even messed their lives up, and they have hope before they even get to that point. Their families are happy, and we're blessed to be able to just give of our lives and invest. My wife and I, right now, got my 2 sons living with me. My daughter's married, pregnant, and living for God. Wonderful husband, but seeing God do really, really great things.
Thanks a lot, Pastor Beswick. That is absolutely amazing. The whole journey Jesus took you on, and we're going to keep praying for you, because I've seen a lot of the people that go to your church and their lives truly are changed. And that is, I think, one of the greatest proofs that Jesus Christ is working in your life. God bless. And I want to thank all you folks for tuning in to the Truth Zone, and join us next week. God bless.